Avoiding pain doesn't make you strong. It makes you sick. And the symptoms aren't random. What if anxiety, burnout, numbness, and even physical illness aren't signs that something is wrong with you, but signs that something true has been ignored for too long? Modern culture tells you to stay positive, stay comfortable, stay distracted. But here's the counterintuitive truth. The more you avoid pain, the more power it gains over your body and mind. What you don't face doesn't disappear. It mutates. Carl Jung warned us about this decades ago. When legitimate suffering is avoided, it doesn't vanish. It turns inward. It becomes neurosis. It becomes tension. It becomes illness. In this video, you'll understand why avoiding pain slowly fragments the psyche, how comfort quietly weakens you, and most importantly, how facing pain consciously restores clarity, strength, and wholeness faster than any shortcut ever could. This isn't about suffering more. It's about suffering correctly. And once you see how this works, you'll never relate to pain or your symptoms the same way again. You don't notice it at first. Avoidance feels harmless, even smart. You tell yourself you're just protecting your peace, staying comfortable, dodging pain until things calm down. But here's the quiet truth. Every time you avoid pain, you pay a hidden price, and it doesn't come due immediately. It compounds, slowly, silently, until your body, your mind, and your life start sending signals you can't ignore. What you push away doesn't vanish, it waits. Pain has patience. And avoidance? That's how suffering sneaks in wearing a different mask. Think of pain like an unpaid bill shoved into a drawer. You don't see it, so you relax. Days pass, then months, but interest builds. Emotional pain works the same way. When you suppress grief, anger, disappointment, or fear, your nervous system keeps the receipt. Eventually, that stored tension leaks out as anxiety, chronic stress, fatigue, or even illness. This is how avoidance quietly turns into neurosis, how unconscious suffering transforms into symptoms. You're not weak for feeling this, you're human. But ignoring pain is like driving with the warning lights covered. The engine still knows. Here's where it gets personal. Maybe you stayed in a relationship that drained you because confrontation felt scarier than loneliness. Maybe you swallowed resentment at work, told yourself to be grateful, and now you wake up tired before the day even starts. That's avoidance at work. The body absorbs what the mind refuses to face. Tight shoulders, shallow breathing, constant irritation. These aren't random, they're messages. And the longer pain is avoided, the louder those messages become. Healing doesn't start with positivity, it starts with honesty. Let's make this practical. Instead of numbing discomfort with endless scrolling, alcohol, or distraction, try this. When discomfort shows up, pause for 90 seconds. Breathe. Ask yourself, what am I actually feeling right now? Name it. Fear, sadness, anger, shame. Naming pain reduces its grip. Write it down if you need to. 5 honest sentences in a notebook can do more for healing than hours of avoidance. This isn't about dwelling on suffering. It's about acknowledging it so it doesn't control you from the shadows. And here's the paradox most people miss. Avoidance feels like control, but it creates chaos. Facing pain feels risky, but it restores order. The moment you stop running, your nervous system begins to settle. Clarity starts to return. Energy frees up. You begin to feel more alive, not less. This is where consciousness replaces autopilot. But once you see the cost of avoidance, another question inevitably arises. What happens when pain isn't just faced, but understood? Pain isn't random, and suffering isn't a mistake. That's the part most people resist. You were taught, subtly, constantly, that pain means something went wrong, that discomfort is failure, that suffering should be eliminated as fast as possible. But here's the deeper truth. Suffering is directional. It points, it teaches. It pushes consciousness to places comfort will never reach. When pain shows up, it's not trying to punish you, it's trying to shape you. Avoidance interrupts that process, and that's where meaning starts to collapse. Think of suffering like resistance in the gym. Without resistance, muscles don't grow, they weaken. Emotional pain works the same way. Grief deepens empathy. Failure sharpens perception. Loss strips illusions. When you rush to escape suffering, you skip the lesson and keep repeating the same pattern. Different faces, same pain. That's how neurosis forms, not from pain itself, but from unfinished suffering. Legitimate suffering, when lived consciously, protects you from psychological fragmentation. Look closely at your own life. The moments that changed you most weren't the easy ones. They were the breakups that forced self-respect, the betrayals that taught discernment, the moments of emptiness that pushed you to search for meaning. Suffering carved depth into you. It moved you closer to wholeness. When you deny that, when you numb pain instead of listening to it, the shadow takes over the task. What you refuse to learn consciously, life teaches you unconsciously, often through repetition and breakdown. Here's a grounded way to work with suffering instead of fighting it. When pain arises, ask a better question. Not how do I get rid of this, but what is this asking of me? Is it asking for a boundary, a truth you've avoided, a responsibility you've delayed? For example, if anxiety spikes every Sunday night, maybe it's not anxiety, it's a life misaligned with your values. That's meaning knocking. Write down one small action that aligns with that truth, one honest conversation, one difficult decision, one act of self-respect. When suffering is met with consciousness, it transforms. It stops being chaos and starts becoming structure. Energy that was trapped in avoidance becomes available for growth and healing. You begin to sense that pain isn't the enemy, unconsciousness is. And once you accept that suffering has purpose, something unsettling but powerful happens. You realize that what you've been running from may actually be the doorway. Neurosis doesn't appear overnight. It forms quietly, in the background, while you're busy being strong, functional, or fine. It's born the moment legitimate suffering is postponed, minimized, or rationalized away. You tell yourself it's not a big deal. Others have it worse. You'll deal with it later, but later never really comes. The psyche doesn't forget what the ego avoids. It stores it. And over time, what was once a clear emotional pain turns into confusion, anxiety, irritability, or a sense that something inside you is fundamentally off. Imagine a pressure cooker with no release valve. Each unexpressed emotion adds heat. Anger swallowed, grief delayed, fear ignored. Eventually, the system compensates the only way it knows how, through symptoms. That's neurosis. Not madness, not weakness, but misdirected energy. It's pain, distorted, suffering, unfinished, meaning blocked. You see this everywhere once you know how to look. People who can't relax, even on vacation. Minds that race when nothing is wrong. Bodies tense in safe rooms. Overthinking, compulsive habits, emotional numbness. All signs of pain that never got its moment in the light. And the cruel irony? The harder you try to control neurosis, the stronger it becomes. Suppression feeds it. Distraction strengthens it. Awareness weakens it. Conscious suffering dissolves what unconscious suffering sustains. Let's bring this down to earth. Suppose you went through a breakup and immediately jumped into productivity. New goals, new routines, constant busyness. On the surface, you look disciplined. Inside, grief never got processed. Months later, anxiety shows up for no reason. That's not random, that's stored pain demanding acknowledgement. A simple practice helps here. Schedule intentional discomfort. Sit alone without stimulation. Journal freely for 10 minutes. Let whatever arises speak. This isn't self-pity, it's emotional hygiene. When neurosis is met with curiosity instead of fear, It begins to loosen. You start to see patterns instead of problems, signals instead of defects. And with that shift, self-compassion grows. You stop asking what's wrong with me and start asking what part of me was never allowed to suffer honestly. That question alone changes the entire inner landscape. And once you see how neurosis is born, another truth becomes impossible to ignore. The body doesn't stay silent forever. Your body is honest in ways your mind is not. You can rationalize pain, explain it away, tell convincing stories about why you're okay. But the body doesn't negotiate with denial. It remembers everything, every emotion you swallowed, every boundary you ignored, every truth you buried. It all leaves a trace. And when the psyche can't speak openly, the body steps in as translator. That's why pain avoided psychologically often resurfaces physically. Headaches, back tension, stomach issues, exhaustion, these aren't betrayals. They're messages. Think of the body as a living archive. It records experiences not in words, but in sensations. Tight jaws from unspoken anger, shallow breathing from chronic fear, a heavy chest from grief that never found expression. You might say it's just stress, but stress is rarely just stress. It's accumulated emotional energy with nowhere to go. When suffering is avoided, the body carries the burden, not to punish you, but to keep you alive and aware. You've probably felt this without realizing it. Ever notice how certain environments drain you instantly, or how your shoulders tense around specific people? That's your nervous system remembering something your conscious mind tries to ignore. Trauma doesn't always come from dramatic events. Often it comes from chronic self-betrayal, saying yes when you mean no, staying silent when your body wants to scream. Over time, this creates disconnection between thought and feeling, between mind and body. Here's something practical you can do today. Start listening downward. When discomfort arises, don't rush to label it as a problem. Ask, where do I feel this in my body? Sit with the sensation for 30 seconds without fixing it. Breathe slowly. This simple act of attention restores connection. Gentle practices help too. Walking without headphones, stretching in silence, slow breathing before sleep. These aren't trends. They're ways of reopening dialogue with yourself. When the body finally gets heard, symptoms often soften. Not instantly, not magically, but steadily. Energy returns. Sleep deepens. Emotional clarity sharpens. You begin to sense that healing isn't about forcing the body to comply, but about letting it finish a conversation that was interrupted long ago. And once you realize how much the body has been carrying for you, another uncomfortable question emerges. Why did comfort become more important than truth in the first place? Comfort feels innocent. It feels earned. After everything you've been through, wanting ease seems reasonable. But here's the uncomfortable truth most people never hear. Too much comfort slowly erodes the psyche. It dulls perception. It weakens resilience. It convinces you that staying the same is safer than becoming more. Comfort isn't rest. It's stagnation disguised as care. And when life becomes a constant search for ease, meaning quietly slips out the back door, think of comfort like warm water slowly heating up. At first, it feels soothing. You relax. You stop paying attention. But without realizing it, the temperature rises. You tolerate more dissatisfaction, more numbness, more inner compromise, because nothing hurts enough yet. That's how people wake up years later feeling empty, disconnected, and vaguely sick without knowing why. Comfort didn't protect them, it anesthetized them. You see this pattern everywhere. Jobs that drain the soul but pay well enough to justify staying. Relationships that feel fine but lack truth or growth. Daily routines packed with distractions, screens, noise, constant input, so you never have to sit with yourself. None of this feels dangerous in the moment. That's the trap. Comfort doesn't scream, it whispers. It says, just stay here, don't rock the boat. Meanwhile, your inner life slowly starves. Here's a simple but powerful shift. Start choosing meaningful discomfort over familiar comfort. That could mean having the conversation you've rehearsed 100 times in your head but never had. It could mean setting a boundary that risks disappointing someone. It could mean spending 10 minutes a day in silence instead of reaching for your phone. These acts aren't dramatic, but they reawaken your nervous system. They remind your psyche that it's alive, capable, responsive. Once you taste that kind of aliveness, comfort loses its grip. You realize peace doesn't come from avoiding tension, but from aligning with truth. The psyche thrives on challenge the way lungs thrive on air. And when comfort stops being your highest value, a new question inevitably arises. What actually restores order inside you when chaos has been avoided for too long? When you finally stop running, something unexpected happens. Things begin to settle. Not because life suddenly gets easier, but because your inner world starts making sense again. Pain faced consciously has a strange organizing power. What once felt chaotic begins to line up. Thoughts slow down, emotions clarify, energy returns. Avoidance scatters the psyche, confrontation gathers it. This is where order is restored, not through control, but through courage. Think of pain like a messy room you've avoided cleaning. Every time you open the door, you feel overwhelmed, so you close it again. But once you step inside and start sorting, slowly, imperfectly, the anxiety drops. Facing pain works the same way. Naming emotions, acknowledging wounds, taking responsibility where it's yours, these acts reduce inner noise. The mind relaxes because it no longer has to maintain illusions. Truth is less exhausting than avoidance. You've likely felt brief moments of this already. That instant relief after telling the truth. The calm that follows a difficult but honest decision. The strange lightness after crying when you hadn't allowed yourself to in years. That's order returning, not perfection, alignment. When pain is faced, it stops leaking into unrelated areas of your life. You're no longer snapping at small things or feeling overwhelmed by simple tasks. Energy stops being wasted on inner conflict. Here's a grounded practice to apply this. Choose one avoided issue, just one. Write down what you know to be true about it without softening the edges. Then write one concrete action you can take within the next 48 hours. A message to send. A boundary to set, a decision to finalize. Action anchored in truth stabilizes the nervous system. You don't need to solve everything, just restore order in one corner of your life. As order returns, something else becomes visible, strength you forgot you had. Confidence grows not from success, but from self-trust, knowing you can face what arises. Pain stops feeling like a threat and starts feeling like a signal. And once you realize that facing pain doesn't destroy you, but reorganizes you, a deeper realization emerges. What you've been avoiding may actually be the missing piece of your strength. Every time you avoid pain, something in you grows stronger. And it's not the part you want in charge. The shadow doesn't form because you're broken. It forms because parts of you were never allowed to exist openly. Anger you weren't allowed to express. Fear you were told to get over. Desires labeled inappropriate. Pain pushed down doesn't disappear. It reorganizes itself in the dark. And what lives in the dark eventually seeks control. Think of the shadow like a neglected child locked in a basement. Ignore it long enough, and it doesn't become quieter. It becomes louder, more disruptive, more desperate to be seen. Avoided pain fuels resentment, passive aggression, self-sabotage, envy, compulsive behaviors. You might not recognize yourself in these moments and think, why did I react like that? That's the shadow acting out what you refused to acknowledge consciously. You see this play out in subtle ways, overreacting to small criticism, feeling irrationally irritated by confident people, sabotaging opportunities right before things improve. These aren't character flaws, they're signals of split-off parts seeking integration. The shadow isn't evil, it's unconscious, and unconscious energy doesn't negotiate, it takes over. Avoidance gives it autonomy. Awareness brings it back into relationship. Here's how you begin integrating instead of fighting it. When a strong reaction shows up, pause and ask, what part of me feels threatened right now? Not what's wrong with me, but what's asking to be seen. For example, if you feel intense jealousy, maybe there's an unlived ambition underneath. Write it down. You don't have to act it out. You have to admit it exists. That single act weakens the shadow's grip. As you do this, something powerful happens. Your reactions soften. You gain choice. Energy that once exploded or imploded becomes available for clarity and creativity. The shadow stops being an enemy and starts becoming raw material for growth. But integration isn't comfortable. It requires courage and honesty. And once you realize the shadow feeds on avoidance, another truth becomes unavoidable. Healing doesn't happen on the surface. It requires descent. Healing isn't about becoming lighter first. It's about going deeper. That's the part most people resist. You were taught to move on, stay positive, look ahead. But real healing doesn't happen by floating above pain. It happens by descending into it. You don't bypass the wound, you enter it. And yes, that sounds intimidating. But avoidance keeps you stuck on the surface, repeating the same cycles with different names. Descent breaks the loop. Think of healing like retrieving something precious that fell into deep water. You can't wish it back to the surface. You have to hold your breath and go down. The fear you feel before descending isn't danger, it's resistance. The psyche guards its wounds because inside them live truths that change everything. That's why descent feels heavy at first. But once you're inside the pain, something surprising happens. It becomes clearer, more contained, less overwhelming than the vague anxiety you carried while avoiding it. You've probably experienced a glimpse of this already. The relief that comes after finally grieving, the calm that follows, admitting a hard truth out loud, the groundedness that arrives when you stop pretending you're okay. Descent replaces diffuse suffering with focused pain, and focused pain is workable. It has edges. It can be metabolized. This is why conscious suffering heals, while unconscious suffering rots. Here's a way to practice descent safely. Choose one emotional wound, not the deepest one yet. Sit with it intentionally, no distractions. Ask yourself, when did this begin? What did I need back then that I didn't get? Write freely without editing. If emotions arise, let them move through you instead of tightening against them. You might cry, you might feel anger. That's not regression, that's release. Pair this with grounding afterward. A walk, a warm shower, steady breathing. The more you practice descent, the less frightening it becomes. You start trusting yourself to go down and come back up intact, stronger, clearer, more whole. And with that trust comes a shift in identity. You stop seeing yourself as fragile and start seeing yourself as capable of facing pain, capable of healing. And once descent becomes possible, a deeper transformation begins. Pain stops being meaningless and starts forging something essential. Pain by itself is just pressure. What transforms it is meaning. Without meaning, suffering feels cruel and random. With meaning, the same suffering becomes formative, like fire shaping steel. This is where many people get lost. They experience pain and immediately ask, why is this happening to me? But the deeper question is, what is this shaping me into? Meaning doesn't erase pain, it redeems it. Think about the difference between carrying a heavy load with no destination versus carrying the same weight because someone you love depends on it. The weight doesn't change, but your capacity does. Meaning reorganizes endurance. When pain is connected to responsibility, purpose, or growth, it stops feeling like pure loss. It becomes an initiation, This is why people can survive unimaginable hardship when they understand what they're suffering for. Meaning is the nervous system's compass. Look back at your own life. The experiences that matured you most weren't the easy wins. They were the moments that demanded responsibility, owning your mistakes, standing by your values, choosing truth over approval. Pain forced you to clarify who you are. When suffering is avoided, meaning collapses and life feels flat. When suffering is accepted consciously, meaning emerges organically. You don't invent it, you discover it. Here's something practical you can do to extract meaning from pain. Ask yourself 3 questions. What did this pain take from me? What did it reveal about me? What responsibility is now mine because of it? For example, betrayal may take innocence, but reveal discernment and assign responsibility for boundaries. Write this out. Meaning becomes tangible when articulated. This process doesn't glorify pain, it prevents it from being wasted. As meaning forms, pain loses its power to poison you. It becomes integrated into your identity instead of lodged against it. You stop asking life to be painless and start asking it to be meaningful. And when that shift happens, another realization quietly surfaces. If meaning can be forged in pain, then comfort was never the goal. Wholeness was. At some point, a quiet choice presents itself, usually without drama. You don't hear a voice, there's no sign. Just a moment where you realize you can't keep living divided. Part of you wants comfort, ease, distraction. Another part wants truth, depth, integrity. Wholeness begins the moment you stop trying to satisfy both. You don't become whole by feeling good all the time. You become whole by being honest all the time. Wholeness is integration. It means allowing joy and grief, strength and vulnerability, confidence and doubt to coexist without one cancelling the other. Comfort says, stay where nothing hurts. Wholeness says, become someone who can hold pain without breaking. That difference changes everything. One leads to numbness, the other leads to vitality. One avoids tension, the other uses tension to grow. You've seen people who chose comfort for too long. They seem calm but flat, functional but disconnected. Then you've seen people who chose wholeness. They're not always relaxed, but they're alive, present, grounded, real. They don't waste energy pretending. Their nervous system isn't busy hiding. That's why they have more clarity, more presence, more authority. Wholeness consolidates energy. Comfort leaks it. Here's what choosing wholeness looks like in daily life. You say no sooner. You rest without guilt. You stop over-explaining. You let yourself feel disappointment instead of masking it with humor or productivity. You invest in practices that strengthen awareness, journaling, reading, reflection. These aren't feel-good habits, they're grounding ones. Once you choose wholeness, pain changes roles. It stops being an enemy and becomes a guide. Neurosis loses its fuel. The body softens, the shadow integrates. Life feels heavier, but cleaner, harder, but truer. And with that choice made, something subtle but irreversible happens. You're no longer trying to avoid pain. You're learning how to carry it consciously. At this point, you already know the truth most people spend their entire lives avoiding. Pain isn't what breaks you. Avoidance is. Every symptom, every pattern, every moment of numbness you felt was never random. It was a message. And now, you have a choice. You can keep running, numbing, distracting, or you can listen. You can face what asks to be felt and finally reclaim the energy you've been losing in silence. So here's the real question. What pain have you been avoiding that's quietly shaping your life right now? What truth have you postponed because it felt inconvenient, uncomfortable, or frightening? And if you're honest, how much longer are you willing to pay that price? Growth doesn't start when life gets easier. It starts the moment you stop lying to yourself about what hurts. You don't need to fix everything today. You just need to stop turning away. One honest conversation, one boundary, One moment of silence where you let your body and mind speak without interruption. That's how integration begins. That's how neurosis loses its grip. And that's how pain transforms from an enemy into a guide. If this message resonated with you, don't let it end here. Subscribe to the Channel Mind's Silent Echo and activate notifications so you don't miss the next conversations about consciousness, shadow, meaning, and psychological freedom. Share this with someone who's been trying to stay strong while slowly breaking inside. And ask yourself, what would change in your life if you chose wholeness over comfort starting today?